Before I talk about the two series that are the topics of today's video, I am going to tell you all a story. For those of you who do not know, I am a scholar of modernist literature. Now, what is that? Does it just mean all literature that's modern? Well, no, not exactly. It's a very loose term, perhaps too loose, referring to literature made in the last couple decades of the 19th century and the first couple decades of the 20th century. To drastically oversimplify a very complicated and nuanced movement, these were scholars concerned with what they perceived of as a failure of institutions, of rationality even failing us, of individualism failing us, of our notions of progress and advancement, and the eventual march of history from an uncultured past toward a cultured future failing us. It's a movement of literature concerned with responding to a world in crisis, a world in which all that had previously been considered solid and substantial enough to undergird the weight of civilization was now undermined. Our senses of community were shredded. People moved en masse from the country to the city. By 1900, about half of Americans lived in cities for the first time ever in the country's history. And that brought with it a lot of positive energy, a lot of hope and faith and progress, but it also caused a lot of alienation, especially since a lot of these people moving to the cities were stuck in jobs where they were simply valued for the amount of money they could produce for the company and not for they themselves. So, in the face of this, our prior notions of literature were undermined. What once passed as realist literature, think your big 19th century giants, your George Eliots, your Tolstoys, your Charles Dickenses, that no longer seemed as realist. It did not seem to take into account just how fragmented experience had become. It did not seem to take into account how strange and ethereal the world had become for a lot of people, were taken out of these traditional societies and thrust in to a rapidly advancing world that seemed to be marching toward its death. We have the rise of imperialism during this time. Now, of course, imperialism had existed before, but it reached its apex in terms of power and influence during this period, and many in the intellectual circles who had supported movements like this in the past had come to the conclusion that they were complete failures, that these Enlightenment notions of brightening the world with progress and reason, or even brightening one's own mind and one's own self with these ideas, seemed passé at best and completely naive at worst. But that does not mean modernism was necessarily a movement of despair and hopelessness. There was a lot of that, but there were also artists like T.S. Eliot and Virginia Woolf and James Joyce who held out hope for a level of restoration amidst the ruins, a renewal of this degraded and decadent and disoriented society. You have a resurgence of belief in myth in this time. Myth as a solution to the problems one encounters with the whole notion of history as progress breaking down. If things are not in fact getting better with the passage of time, where do we turn to? And they turn to myth. They turn to these ancient stories, not to merely copy them, but to take inspiration from those ideas of emotional and spiritual renewal amidst this dried, desert-like wasteland that they found modern industrial society to be. Now, of course, the opposition to industrialization is nothing new, but what was different about the modernists was that they understood that the restoration for which they looked could not be accomplished through simple romanticization. It could not be accomplished through simple abstraction or retreating to old reactionary ideas of what the world used to be like. It required holding out hope for partial renewals, incomplete but still life-affirming connections with oneself, with one's fellows, and with one's community. Modernism held out hope for restorations via transformation. They understood that while the fall of these certainties about society was not a good thing necessarily, it happened for a reason. It happened because these old notions of belief no longer seemed adequate in a rapidly changing world in which all that was known seemed to dissolve into mere vague impressions. The best modernist literature used the past as a vehicle for moving forward beyond notions of traditional society, but also beyond the now hollow-seeming notions of progress. And these great works relied on not providing simple dogmatic frameworks through which one could escape from the complexities of life in the modern world. There were no simple means, no cheap tricks through which the crises of the world could be conveniently solved. Now, why did I need to say all that? Why did I need to go and give you a long lecture that a lot of you probably did not find the most enlightening in the world? Well, it's because Amphibia and Steven Universe are both great shows. These are thoughtful and empathetic programs. They're nuanced and tender depictions of people trying to figure out the disorienting world around them, trying to heal their relationships with themselves and others, and also build new relationships. And in their depictions, these shows are a few cuts above what you typically see in animation, or in any kind of show that is dealing with these same issues of trying to connect with people, trying to find a place for oneself, trying to figure oneself out, animated or otherwise. Steven Universe has moments of lyrical, quiet brilliance. It can be a loud show, but its quiet moments are some of the most profound in pretty much any animated show I've seen for the last 5 or 10 years. It has episodes that I adore, such as Mr. Greg and Alone Together. When Steven Universe is at its best, functioning on its highest level, it has a magic all its own. This is a magic that draws partly from Ghibli, but feels utterly unique, like a cross between a lighter Ghibli movie, think Kiki's Delivery Service, an airy Hirokazu Koreeda film, such as Our Little Sister, a Debussy piece, and one of those lovely city symphonies that were popular in the 1920s. These bursts of originality in filmmaking. But Steven Universe, despite its strengths, nonetheless has limits. And when I keep coming back to why I appreciate Amphibia more than I do Steven Universe, as Amphibia has finished its second season, it comes back to a lot of the same reasons why I find modernist literature as compelling as I do. It's about renewal, it's about revival, it's about revivification and reunion, and gluing together old conceptions of the self and the world. But not in a way that is about simple reactionary reversion or about mere fantastical idealism. Rather, it is about investigating the chaos that caused such a disintegration in the first place and finding the possibilities for revival in that chaos. Amphibia, not quite to the extent of modernist literature, but to a certain extent, embodies that ethos in a way that Steven Universe, for all its wonders, simply does not. Steven Universe takes things too safe, in my view. It takes far too few chances. It is far too concerned, in my eyes, with delivering its audiences an easily digestible, easily palatable story. Things are broken in Steven Universe, and to the show's credit, it never stays away from the darker sides of human life. But there is never any doubt in Steven Universe that all that is broken will be fixed. That broken bonds will be restored into wholeness in a way that is cathartic and comfortable, in a way that's very reassuring. Now, there's nothing wrong with that kind of storytelling exactly. It's a perfectly decent way to go about making a show. And I hesitate to criticize Steven Universe in such a systematic way because, number one, I do like the show, and number two, a lot of the criticisms it receives from certain corners of the internet are inane and reductionist, at best. No, the show is not functioning as fascist apologia because it promotes reunion and reconciliation between Pink Diamond and the other diamonds. Or because Spinell's bitterness and resentment, and honestly most problems in the show, can be solved through Steven's empathy and optimism, his tenderness and compassion. Rather, these things are simply a case of the show's over-idealization of the power of love and empathy. Now, of course, love and empathy can be powerful, I'm not disputing that, but the show can go a bit too far in its exaltation of these things in a way that verges on absurd romanticization, even by the standards of shows directed at all audiences. I suppose this is why I have never been able to accept this show as vociferously as a lot of its most ardent supporters have. Even at its best, I've felt an arm's distance from it, more enraptured by what it could be than what it actually was. This is not because I wanted it to be a show of suffering and bloodshed like Game of Thrones, but because I wanted it to entertain mystery and nuance and ambiguity more than it consistently proved willing to do. I wanted it to perform restoration and revitalization, sure, but I wanted it to do so in such a way that did not imply ignoring the factors that had caused such a crisis of meaning, such a level of existential self-doubt in the first place. Amphibia is also a show directed at a younger audience that valorizes the restoration and renewal and reforging of bonds between different people, but it does so in such a way that does not neglect the very real structural causes that led to those fractures forming in the first place. Now, I realize that what I'm saying could sound a little opaque and abstract, and it is true that I am drawing a lot from esoteric conceptions of modernism, but allow me to make it a little more concrete for y'all. I'll focus more closely on the bonds between Anne, Marcy, and Sasha, the three friends at the show's heart. Anne wants more than anything to return home. She has been consistent and driven in the pursuit of that goal, and never has she questioned that her friends might not hold the same values as she does, that they might not want to go home as much as she does. Marcy is the one who convinced them to take the box in the first place, She thought her home life was so terrible that she wanted to escape from it at all costs. Sasha is the one who most likely decided that they should steal it instead of, say, buying it, even though I'm sure they had the money. Anne is the one who actually has to take the music box, and thus the three of them end up in an unknown world once they open it. As opposed to Anne's steadfast desire to return home, Sasha doesn't know what she wants. She drifts throughout the show. What she wants more than anything is to repair her bonds with Anne and Marcy, because she values these friendships more than she values anything else, including her sense of her own self-worth. She desires more than anything for the others to think of her well, to think of her as their hero, always rescuing them from dangerous situations. So when Anne starts to not think of her in that light and to think of her in a much more negative light, Sasha doesn't know what to do. She joins Grime and the other Toads to stage a rebellion, not because she necessarily wants to take over the world, she doesn't, but because she wants to do a favor for the people who have been there for her, the people she really cares about. And then you have Marcy, whose life on Amphibia is demonstrably better than it was on Earth. On Earth, she was kind of a loser. She was clumsy and awkward, and no one took her seriously. In Amphibia, she is one of the most important citizens of Newtopia. She has the ear of the king, and all the citizens of Newtopia value her contributions. There's even a big statue of her in the city. Thus, Marcy and Sasha conflict with Anne over Anne's desire to take them all home. Marcy tries to stop them from leaving for Earth because she doesn't want to go back, and she doesn't want her friends to go back. And so she hides the truth from them. Sasha genuinely wants to help the Toads, but doing so causes her to conflict with Anne, and thus Anne thinks of Sasha as a backstabber and betrayer, even though this is a very shallow and reductionist view of Sasha as a character. Now, one could view these conflicts merely from Anne's perspective and believe that Anne is absolutely right, and that her friends just need to do whatever she wants, but the show does not unilaterally take Anne's side, far from it. It genuinely wants us to ask questions about whether Anne is in the wrong for not inquiring about whether her friends actually wanted to go home. She's supposed to be the empathetic one, the one who's the heart of the group, and yet she never seriously considers the perspectives of the two people she was the closest to since she was a very small child. And I would argue she is definitely in the wrong for attempting to kill or at least seriously hurt Sasha during True Colors. She perhaps has the right to be angry, but when she refuses to listen to Sasha's desperate pleading about Andreas not being who he appears to be, Anne assumes a lot of the blame for the disintegration of the current social order of Amphibia that occurs at the end of the episode when King Andreas takes power. In Steven Universe, a situation like this would simply end with everyone forgiving everyone else, and everyone just trying to be friends and trying to be better. And there is nothing wrong with that, necessarily, but I applaud Amphibia for understanding the real differences in opinion between these three friends. They have three different perspectives, so the conflict between them is not just about people not being nice enough to each other. It's about a real conflict that does not have an easy resolution. Amphibia will probably end with the three friends reuniting, but the relationship between them will not be as it was before. They will have to accept that they have all grown and changed, and that there are a lot of differences between them. They will have to reforge that bond between them. This is a small difference from the Steven Universe model, but I think it is an important one. The modernists, I believe, would be proud. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching Amphibia. It's a genuinely charming show that becomes a surprisingly brilliant piece of drama during the second half of its second season. I can't wait to see what kinds of scenarios they concoct for season 3. Also, watch Steven Universe. I know I was critical of it here, but I do quite like the show. And it does have some brilliant episodes, and also Steven Universe Future is a brilliant coda that solves a lot of the problems I had with the original show, even if it still suffers from the same over-idealization from time to time. So anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.